B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Pesachim Daf Chov Zayin, and we're going to start on Daf Chovav Amud Beis in the middle of the Amud. And we're going back to our Mishnah on Daf Chof Aleph Amud Aleph, the beginning of the Perek, where we first learnt about the time that Chometz is Asur B'Hana, you have to dispose of the Chometz. And then the Mishnah said, V'lo yasik bo tanur v'kiraim, since Chometz is Asur B'Hana, you're not allowed to derive any benefit from it, you're also not allowed to heat up an oven, a stove, with the Chometz whilst disposing of it, assuming that you're disposing of it after the time of Isur Hana, then you're not allowed to have any benefit whilst disposing of it. Says the Gemara, V'lo yasik bo tanur v'kiraim, Tanur Rabbanon. We learnt in the Brisa as follows, Tanur she'isiku beklipe orla, we're talking now about somebody who did heat up an oven using Surya Hana. Now an oven, we have to be aware that even though today we don't make ovens that way because we don't really have earthenware ovens, but when they would make earthenware ovens, as with any other earthenware utensils which we're going to learn about later, the way they would make it is they would first form it with clay, or however they would make the form of the vessel, the utensil they're trying to make, and then they would heat it up in a furnace, in an oven, or in the case of an oven, they would heat it up within itself, they would heat up the oven, and that would harden the walls of the oven, and only after that it would become usable as a regular oven, and they would heat up the oven as one would heat up any oven or stove to bake bread in it, to cook food on it, etc. So we're now discussing what happens if somebody used Isurei Hana, for example, Orla or Klei HaKerem. We know what Orla is, we've discussed it, that fruit trees, the first 3 years after they're planted, they are Asur B'Hana. Klei HaKerem, which is vegetation that was grown in a vineyard, assuming it was done in a prohibited fashion, they are Asur B'Hana. What happens if somebody took the peels of Orla? And Rashi says that we're talking about in a way where it's types of peels that are included in the fruits of Orla, because only the fruits of Orla are Asur, and these are types of peels of types of fruits that are considered fruits. Oy bekashin, or straw of Klei HaKerem that was grown in a way that was Asur by Klei HaKerem. It doesn't actually use the word pri, and therefore it doesn't need to be fruits itself, but if the straw that grew in the Klei HaKerem in a prohibited fashion, and it's Asur B'Hana, what happens if you heated up an oven using these Isurei Hana? And we're going to now discuss what happens in two different scenarios. Number one, a new oven, which means that you actually use these Isurei Hana to strengthen the oven to now be able to use it as a regular oven. And what happens if you heated up an old oven, which means an oven that was already a strengthened, usable oven. You heated it up because you wanted to cook or bake in it, and you used Isurei Hana to heat up the oven. So Tanur shehisiku beklipe orla ibekashin shel Klei HaKerem, if you heated up an oven with the peels of Orla or the straw of Klei HaKerem, which are both Asur B'Hana, Chodosh, in the event that it's a new oven, Yutatz, you have to smash, you have to destroy the oven. Yoshon, if it's an old oven, Yutzan, then you're just not allowed to use that heat. That means cool down the oven. And now the heat that came from those Isurei Hana, for all intents and purposes, has vanished. And now you can reheat the oven with wood or with anything which is Mutar B'Hana, and then you can use the oven normally. However, a new oven where there's no way of undoing the benefits of the Isurei Hana, because you actually use these Isurei Hana to benefit the oven, to strengthen the oven, to complete the creation of the oven, and that's something that's going to stay. And since one's not allowed to have Hana from Isurei Hana, and the benefits of these Isurei Hana have become an intrinsic part of the oven, therefore you have no choice, you have to destroy the oven. Ofo boyes apas. What happens if you if you baked bread, which in this oven that was heated up with Isurei Hana? So now it's not about, is the oven benefiting from it? Let's assume that we can cool down the oven, but you have bread that was baked in it. That means the bread benefited from these Isurei Hana, or more accurately, from the heat of the disposal, of the burning of the Isurei Hana. So it's a machlokes tanoim. Rabbi Omer hapas asura. Rabbi says that the bread itself is osur because we assume or we view the bread as containing the benefits, containing Isurei Hana in it. It's called shvach eitzim bepas. That means even though the heat of these Isurei Hana came from the Isurei Hana whilst it was burning, and we could have assumed that whilst it's burning, or the heat comes from a burnt, a disposed of Isurei Hana, which after it's disposed of is no longer Osur B'Hana. And therefore we could have assumed that I'm not allowed to have Hana from the Isurei Hana themselves, but from the heat that is consequent of their disposal, maybe you could have Hana. Says Rabbi, no, the bread itself is osur because we say that there's shvach eitzim bepas. There's benefits of the woods itself, of these Isurei Hana themselves in the bread, and therefore the bread is osur b'Hana. The Chachamim argue with Rabbi and say hapas muteres, that the bread is mutter, because even though the Isurei Hana you're not allowed to have benefit from, but the heat that emanates from the burning of the Isurei Hana is no longer considered the benefit or direct benefit of Isurei Hana, and therefore the bread is mutter. And we're going to see soon that according to these Chachomim, that even the bread is mutter, it's clear that even a new oven, one would not have to destroy the oven. There's a chiddush that even though the bread is mutter, lekatchila you shouldn't use these Isurei Hana to make bread. And therefore in an old oven, you should let the oven cool down. Everybody agrees with that. But a new oven, where we saw before in the beginning of the mission, in the beginning of this brisa, that you have to destroy the oven, that would not make sense according to the Chachomim, because according to the Chachomim, the heat that comes from Isurei Hana is not considered an intrinsic part of the Isurei Hana, and therefore, in the same way as you're allowed to eat the bread, you certainly do not have to smash the oven. And we'll soon see who is this opinion that holds that you actually have to smash the oven. It's definitely not the Chachomim. The Chachamim say that even the bread, hapas, is muteres. Continues this brisa, bishlo al gabe gecholim. If you cooked any dish by heating up this dish, by cooking it using coals of Isurei Hana, divrei hakol muter. Everybody agrees that coals are no longer considered Isurei Hana, and the heat that emanates from these coals are not considered as Hana from the Isurei Hana, and therefore everybody would agree that the bread is mutter. Asks the Gemara, V'hotanya bein chodosh bein yoshon yutzon. This brisa seems to contradict another brisa that says that even a new oven you do not need to smash, you can just allow it to cool down and then you can use it, to reheat it with woods that are okay. Says the Gemara Lo Kashya, as we said before, Horebi Horabonon. According to the Chachomim who say that even the bread is mutter, which they hold that we do not say that there's shvach eitzim, that there's benefit of the woods themselves, bepas, in the bread or in the oven that's being strengthened, therefore you clearly would not have to smash the oven. However, according to Rabbi, who says that the bread itself is osur, we could entertain the idea that not only the bread is osur, but even the oven itself that was strengthened by these woods are also osur b'Hana. And the Gemara is soon going to challenge that and say that it could be that Rabbi says it's only osur is the bread itself that you baked with the Isurei Hana, so you have benefits of Isurei Hana in the bread. However, in the oven, it's true that you heated up the oven with these Isurei Hana, you strengthened the oven, and the oven benefited even long term from these Isurei Hana, but nobody's actually eating the oven. Whenever you're going to use the oven, you're going to cook or bake in it, it's always going to be together with other firewood, which is not Isurei Hana. And then we're going to have a new discussion. When you benefit from Isurei Hana together with something that's not Isurei Hana, you have a new discussion. Zeh v'zeh goyrem. When you have two causes of benefit, one is Osur b'Hana, one is Mutar b'Hana, do we say that it's Osur or not? That's a new discussion. The only thing we see explicitly from Rabbi is that he holds that the bread is asur, and we say that the shvach eitzim bepas. And we'll soon discuss whether the first halacha, that you have to smash the oven, is also Rabbi or maybe not necessarily. So let's see that inside. So you just said now that the first brisa that says that you have to smash a new oven is Rabbi. The second brisa that says you can just cool down the new oven is the Chachomim. Now it's true that according to the Chachomim that you're even allowed to eat the bread, and you don't say that the shvach eitzim bepas. It's true that you do not need to smash the new oven. However, according to Rabbi, who says that the bread itself is osur, is it so clear that you have to smash a new oven? Maybe not. Eimer de shamas leila Rabbi. All you know from Rabbi explicitly, mishum de yesh shvach eitzim bepas. You know that if you baked bread using Isurei Hana, then the benefit of these woods that were Osa B'Hana are in the bread, and therefore, so to speak, the breads themselves have some Isurei Hana in them, and therefore, you're not allowed to eat the breads. Zeh v'zeh goyram, however, in the case of a new oven, where once you're actually cooking or baking in it, it's never only the Isurei Hana that contributed to the edibility of the food. It's the fact that, number one, you had a strengthened oven, which was due to the Isurei Hana, and also due to the woods that were now heating up the oven that were not Isurei Hana. That's called Zeh v'Zeh Goyram, when you have two causes for one outcome. Mishamasle, maybe in that case, Rabbi would agree that it's mutter, and you do not need to smash the oven. And in the case of Zeh v'Zeh Goyram, had there been such a situation of Zeh v'Zeh Goyram with baking the bread, it could be the bread itself would be mutter as well. When Rabbi said you're not allowed to eat the bread, is without Zeh v'Zeh Goyram. How do you know that even Zeh v'Zeh Goyram, according to Rabbi, is osur? And if it's not Rabbi, then the question comes back, who is it? Who is the opinion of the first brisa that says that you have to smash a new oven if you strengthened it with Isurei Hana? You're right. It could be it's not Rabbi. The second brisa that says that you do not need to smash the new oven is the Rabbanon. And in the first brisa that say that you have to smash the new oven, it's not necessarily Rabbi. We don't have proof that it's Rabbi, but it may well be Rabbi Eliezer. And now we have to find which Rabbi Eliezer the Gemara is referring to. Hi Rabbi Eliezer. Ilema Rabbi Eliezer the So'ir. Which Rabbi Eliezer is this? Is it Rabbi Eliezer referring to So'ir, which is leaven, something we would call yeast, where they would use the So'ir to make any other dough chometz? Ditnan we learned in a Mishnah. So'ir shel chulin. If you have yeast of chulin, which is allowed to be eaten by everybody, v'shel truma, and you also have yeast which is from truma, which only a kohen is allowed to eat. Shenaflu l'toich isa. First, some chulin yeast fell into some dough, and before the dough could actually become leaven, could rise, the yeast of the chulin was taken out, and chulin and yeast of truma was then put in. There was neither enough yeast or strength in the yeast of either the chulin sa'ir or the truma sa'ir to actually make this dough chometz, or to actually ferment this dough. But the two together, v'nitztarfu v'chimtzu, because there was first the chulin yeast and then the truma yeast, the power of the two together actually made this dough become chometz, or made it become edible and fermented the dough. Then Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Achrein Aniba. Rabbi Eliezer says we always assume that it was the strength of the second one that you put into the dough. So if you first put the chulin one and then took it out and put truma, we assume that it's the truma that made the dough, or the truma was the main component that made the dough into dough, and therefore it's got the status of truma. If, however, the truma was put in first and then taken out, and then the chulin was put in, we assume that this dough has the status of chulin. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Chachamim say, Bein shenofal isur lekatchila, ubein shenofal isur lebasoif. It doesn't matter which one was put in first, or which one was put in last. La'olam einoi oiser. It will only make the dough osur, which means it will only become a truma dough, only if the sa'ir of truma in and of its own right had the ability of making the dough into a dough. If, however, there was not enough strength in the sa'ir of truma to make this dough into bread, into chometz, then it is not considered a bread of truma. So that's the machlokes so far. That's the Mishnah. But Omar Abaye commented on this Mishnah, and he said, and actually Abaye was commenting on Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said that it depends which one was put in second. Abaye says, Lo yishonu elo shekodam v'silik es iser, like I explained it, that it's talking about you took out the dough of the chulin, and you then put in, not the dough, the sa'ir of the chulin, and then you put in the sa'ir of the truma. If shekodam v'silik es iser, that means if you took one out before putting the second one in, then you always see which was last. If you took out, if first you put in the truma, and then you took out the truma and you put in the chulin, then this dough is not going to have the status of truma, because you took out the chulin before putting in the chulin sa'ir. And since it did not manage to become a proper dough consequent to the truma sa'ir, and you took out the truma sa'ir before the dough managed to ferment, then now that you've put in the chulin sa'ir, and it's consequent to the chulin sa'ir that actually managed to make this bread into bread, we give it the status of chulin. If you left the truma in there and then added the chulin, then in that case asur. According to Abaya, it's going to be asur, even though neither the truma nor the chulin on their own right could have made this bread into sa'ir. Since they're both in there together, zeh v'zeh goyrim. Even though neither one on their own could do it, the two together could do it. You've got an iser hana, or an iser together with a heta, truma and chulin, that both together made this dough into the bread. Therefore it's asa. Alma, so you see, according to Abaye's interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer, zeh v'zeh goyrim asur. You see clearly that in the event that they're both in there together, and they're both together making the bread become bread, it has the status of truma and is also for anyone who's not a kohen. So you see clearly that Rabbi Eliezer holds zeh v'zeh goyrim is asur. So the Gemara says we assume that in the brisa we started with, that if you heat up an oven, a new oven, strengthening it with isurei hana, and then it cools down, and then you heat it up again with wood that is mutar b'hana, and now the bread that's being baked on it is benefiting also from the heat of the wood that's mutar b'hana, and also from an oven that incorporated in the oven is also the benefits of isurei hana. The two together, zeh v'zeh goyrim, it's asur, and therefore you have to smash this oven. Says the Gemara, Mimai, the time of Rabbi Eliezer Kabaya. Who said that Rabbi Eliezer actually agrees with Abaye's interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer? Dilma maybe, Taima de Rabbi Eliezer, that when Rabbi Eliezer says that you always see which was put in last, is mishum de achar achrin aniba. Lo yishno kodam b'silik es iser, lo kodam b'silik es iser. Maybe when Rabbi Eliezer says that you always see which was put in last, it doesn't mean that you took out the first one first and then you put in the second one. And then you would be able to say that only in that case, if the chulin was put in first, then the chulin was put in second, then it's mutar. And as Abaya explained, that it's only true if the truma was first taken out, but if the truma is still in there, zeh v'zeh goyrim, it's asur. Maybe we're talking about they're both in there. They were not put in together. They were put in first one and then the other, and they're both there together. We always assume that the one that was put in last is the most dominant one. So if the chulin was put in last, then that's the most dominant power making this dough into the bread, and therefore it's chulin. If the truma was put in last, then not. But it's not because zeh v'zeh goyrim is asur. It's always whatever was put in last. Irrespective of whether you first put in the truma and you took out the truma sa'ir before putting in the chulin sa'ir, that even if you left in the truma sa'ir and you then put in the chulin sa'ir, then in that case it will also be mutar. Even though it's a zeh v'zeh goyrim, they're both in there together, nonetheless it will be mutar. For example, in a case where you put the chulin and the truma sa'ir into the dough together, it could well be that it's a zeh v'zeh goyrim, neither one was last, it will be mutar. And the only time that Rabbi Eliezer says that it's osur is if you first put in heter and afterwards you put in the issa. We say that since this one came later, the very fact that it's later, not even together it wouldn't do this. If it only because it came later, that's the more dominant one, and that will determine the status of the dough. In which case, if you're not going to follow Abaya, then you have no proof that according to Rabbi Eliezer, zeh v'zeh goyrem is asur. So then the question comes back, who is the Tana of the Brisa that says that you have to smash this new oven that was heated up with Isurei Hana? Elo Rabbi Eliezer, da'atze Asherah. It's actually a different Rabbi Eliezer. It's not Rabbi Eliezer of the yeast that we just mentioned. It's a different Rabbi Eliezer of another mission in Avodah Zarah regarding Asherah. Asherah wood is wood that has the status of Avodah Zarah. And we learned in the Mishnah as follows: Not alemenu eitzim. If you take woods of this Asherah tree, asurim b'hana, and the woods of Asherah tree are actually osur b'hana. Hisik bohenes hatanur. If you heat up an oven with these woods, chodosh, if it's a new oven, and now this oven is eternally going to be usable, consequent to the benefits of this heating up of the Isurei Hana, and therefore yutatz, you actually have to smash the oven. Yoshon, however, if it's an old oven, and then the benefits of this heating up could easily be removed by just cooling it down, yutzan, just let the oven cool down, don't have any benefit of the heating up, and then you can use the oven again later. Offer boyes hapas. If you heated up bread using woods of Atzei Asherah, asurin b'hana, they're osur b'hana, which is similar to Rabbi, what Rabbi said before, that if you heat up something with Isurei Hana, we say that there's shvach eitzim b'pas, it's osur b'hana. Nis'ar v'b'achiris, if these breads that are osur b'hana because they were baked using woods of Isurei Hana, if they got mixed in with other breads, v'achiris b'achiris, and those other breads got mixed in with other breads, which means that there's now many breads that any one of them could have been that one bread or those breads that were baked with Isurei Hana. It doesn't matter how many more breads there are, kulon asurin b'hana, since any one of them could be a bread that was heated up with Atzei Asherah and is osur b'hana, we render all of them as osur b'hana. That's the Tana Kama. Rabbi Eliezer says no. He agrees with everything else the Tana Kama says. He agrees that a new oven would have to be smashed, and an old oven you can cool down, and if breads that were baked in it are osur b'hana. However, he says that he adds in one detail with which he argues with the Chachomim. He says all these breads, you don't need to assume they're all osur b'hana. Yoylech hana liyam hamelech. As long as you don't have benefit of the value of those breads, it's enough. So, for example, if you had one bread which is worth 1 shekel that was heated up with Isurei Hana, and that got mixed into 10 breads, and those 10 breads got mixed into another 100 breads, then the benefit you have of Isurei Hana is that 1 shekel bread. So he says, take 1 shekel, throw it into the Yam HaMelech, destroy it, and that will, so to speak, redeem the value, the benefit that you had of Isurei Hana, and all the other breads you can then eat, or you can actually eat all the breads. Yoylech Hana leYam HaMelech. Omruloi, the Chachomim said to him, they argued and said, no, ein poidim la'avodah zarah. When it comes to avodah zarah, you cannot redeem the Isser. Since it's an Isser that's not redeemable, it will not help to actually dispose of a shekel, and all the breads are osur b'hana. But what do we see here? We see explicitly that there is a Rabbi Eliezer who says that a new oven has to be destroyed, and he says that, well, he says that the breads themselves are osur b'hana. But not only are the breads osur b'hana, he says that new oven has to be destroyed. So you see it clearly, you have a Rabbi Eliezer here who holds that zeh v'zeh goyrem is asur. And Rashi says, for the same token, you could have said that it's the Tana Kama of Rabbi Eliezer. They say the same thing. They're not arguing in this detail. They also hold that zeh v'zeh goyrem is asur. But Rashi says, since we don't know the name of this Tana Kama, therefore we prefer to use a Tana that we know by name, Rabbi Eliezer. And by the way, when I explained that Yoylech leYam HaMelech, that you throw the value of the bread, which we said was a shekel, into the Yam HaMelech, that's some Rishonim learn that way. Rashi actually says that you have to throw out the value of the woods of Asherah from which you benefited from. And it's a big discussion in the Rishonim. Says the Gemara, no. You don't have proof from here, from this Mishnah that we just learned regarding Asherah, that Rabbi Eliezer actually holds that Zev Zagorim will be also to the extent that the oven that was heated up with Orla or Klei HaKerem has to be destroyed. When does Rabbi Eliezer say, when do they hold you have to smash the oven? Ba'avodah Zarah. Only because we're talking about Asherah, which is an avodah zarah. An idol worship, the Chomer Isura. That we know that avodah zarah is more stringent than many other Isurim. B'shar Isurim, however, how do you know that Rabbi Eliezer would say by Orla or by Klei HaKerem? Maybe there he'll say it's not so stringent and you do not need to smash the oven. Over there, Zev Zagorim will be mutter, not osa. Mishamasle, how do you know that Rabbi Eliezer would say the same? And then we're back to our original issue. Who is the Tana that says that by Orla and Klei HaKerem, in a new oven, you would have to destroy that oven? Says the Gemara, I hear your possible refutation to the proof, but Elohim Kain Aman Tarmei. So you're right. So maybe Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold this way, even by Orla and Klei HaKerem. But then who does hold this way? We don't know of any other Tana to whom to attribute this brisa that says that Chodosh Yutatz, even by Orla and Klei HaKerem. And since we don't have any other opinion, we take it for granted that since there is an opinion that says Zev Zagorim is Osir by Avodah Zarah, it must be that same opinion, that same Rabbi Eliezer, that would say the same with Orla and Klei HaKerem. And besides for that we have no choice, we have to assume it's Rabbi Eliezer. Hotanya Behedya, we found an explicit brisa that says V'chein hoya Rabbi Eliezer oiser b'chol isurim shebatayra. We found a brisa that explicitly expresses that Rabbi Eliezer will say the same even by other Yisurim, even not by Avodah Zarah. Even by Orla and Klei HaKerem, Zev Zagorim is Osir, and if you heat up a new oven with those Isurei Hana, you have to smash the oven. So this is the conclusion of the Gemara, that the Tana of the brisa that we started with, that if you heat up a new oven with Orla or Klei HaKerem, has to be smashed, it must be Rabbi Eliezer. Continues the Gemara. Omar Rabbi. Rabbi is now saying that we had Rabbi in that brisa. Rabbi says that the bread itself is not allowed to be eaten. The Chachomim say even the bread is allowed to be eaten because they say that the heat is already consequent to the Isurei Hana having been disposed of. Rabbi says no. Since the flame of the Isurei Hana, whilst it's being disposed of, is directly benefiting the food, yesh shvach eitzim bepas, and you're not allowed to eat the bread. Now we had a discussion, does Rabbi also say Zev Zagorim, not only is the bread osur, but even if you heated up a new oven with it, you would have to smash the oven? We had a discussion, it's not clear whether Rabbi himself would hold that or not. So Abai is saying, Im tim tzeloimar Zev Zagorim osur. Whether you say, like we suggested at the beginning, that the first brisa in its entirety is Rabbi, and then Rabbi Hainu Rabbi Eliezer. Then Rabbi says the same as Rabbi Eliezer, that Zev Zagorim. Vim tim tzeloima Zev Zagorim muta. Or you're going to say that Rabbi holds Zev Zagorim muta, v'hocha, and over here regarding the breads itself, mishum deyesh shvach eitzim bepasu. That the tanur itself, according to Rabbi, is mutter. You don't need to smash it. Why? Because Zev Zagorim is mutter, according to that second option. However, Rabbi clearly says that the breads themselves are osur b'hana, because yeshvach eitzim bepas. These breads have direct benefit exclusively from Isurei Hana, and therefore the breads are osur. But however, whichever way you hold it, hani ka'oris, if you heat it up, either ka'oris, which are bowls and plates, kaisers or cups, utzloichios or flasks, that you drink directly from them, if you actually strengthened them and completed their formation in an oven heated up by Isurei Hana, Asiri, they themselves will be osur. It's not like a new oven where you never eat the oven, you never have direct benefit from an oven, you only ever have benefit from an oven if you also heat up the oven, and therefore the next time you heat up the oven, you're benefiting also from the oven that has been influenced by Isurei Hana, and also from heat, from wood, which is mutar b'hana. That's only in an oven where you actually have two causes that are going to benefit whatever you're cooking or baking in it. But the breads themselves, there's no second there's no second cause. Similarly, these ka'oris, koisos and sleichios, there's no second cause. You drink directly from them. You don't need something else to help you benefit from them. So in the same way as the bread is osar, so too these ka'oris, koisos and sleichios are going to be osar. Ki pligi, where's the machlokes between Rabbi and the Chachomim, whether you say shvach eitzim bepas or not, betanur or kedera? Only by an oven or a pot, where you never have benefit from an oven or a pot, unless you have an added source of causing the benefit, which means an added source of heat. Besides for being a pot, besides for being an oven, I also need the heat of the woods being burning in and under it. Only there we have the machlokes whether zeh v'zeh goyrem is mutar or osur. Leman de'oma zeh v'zeh goyrem osur, it's osur. Leman de'oma zeh v'zeh goyrem mutar, shori, the tanur and the kedera are going to be mutar. But ka'oris, koisos and sleichios are always going to be osur if you hold that yesh shvach eitzim bepas. Ikad Omra, another version holds, mutar. Even if you assume that Rabbi only says yesh shvach eitzim bepas and he holds zev goyrem is mutar, he's going to say that by kedera asura, that regarding a pot is the same status as ka'oros, koisos and sleichios, that can be used even without the added benefit of being heated up, because it can hold food items that are going to be cooked even before they're cooked. And since these pots can hold the items, therefore if you made these pots, these new pots, you strengthened them with Isurei Hana, then the pots are going to have to be smashed. It's not like an oven, that the only benefit you ever have from an oven is if you also put in woods which are mutar, and then you have a zeh v'zeh goyrem, you have two causes of benefit to the food item. In the pot, as with flasks, cups, bowls and plates, where you can have benefit from them even without adding the wood, therefore they become totally osar and have to be smashed if they were first heated up with Isurei Hana. Continues the Gemara. Omer of Yosef, Omer of Yudam Ashmuel. Tanur sheyisiku beklipe orlo oy bekashin shel klei keren. This is now Shmuel's version of the brisa that we started off with at the beginning of the sugya on Daf Chavav Amud Beis. He says that if you heat up an oven with these Isurei Hana, Chodosh Yutot Yoshon Yutzon. If it's a new oven, you have to smash it. If it's an old oven, just let it cool down. Offer Boyes Hapas. So far, it's the same as we saw in the brisa before. However, Offer Boyes Hapas, if you heated up bread in such an oven, Rabbi Omer Hapas Muteres, he says it the opposite to the way we saw before. Shmuel's version was that according to Rabbi, the bread is mutter to be eaten, and according to the Chachomim, the bread is asur. You have an exact opposite version as the brisa we learned. Asks the Gemara of Atanya Ibcha, did we not learn in the brisa the opposite on Daf Chavav Amud Beis? And the Gemara gives two options. Either Shmuel Ibchatoni, it could be that Shmuel's version of the brisa was the opposite to the version that we have. V-boy say more, it could be no. It could be Ba'alma Kosova Shmuel, it could be Shmuel also knew that the accurate version is like we have it here, that according to Rabbi it's Osur, according to the Rabbanon it's Mutter. However, Shmuel had an interest to switch them over, so to speak, to confuse the people, but with the intentions of the halacha being brought to light. Because Shmuel holds that the halacha in this case is actually that it's osur. Even though Rabbi is the one that says osur, and the Tanakama, the Chachomim say, not the Tanakama, the Chachomim say it's mutter. And the Chachomim are always a plural, and normally the halacha is like the Rabbim, like the majority, not like the minority. And therefore, according to the general rules, the halacha would not be like Rabbi, and the bread would be mutter. In this case, Shmuel knew the bread is osur. But how is he going to impress on people that the halacha is that the breads are osur? Everyone's going to learn the brisa, see that Rabbi says osur, and the majority of the Chachomim say mutter, they'll assume it's mutter. Shmuel had an idea. I'll teach the brisa the opposite way around, as if Rabbi says it's mutter, and the Chachomim say it's osur. And then everybody will rule like the Chachomim it's osur, and that's what the truth is, that's the halacha. So that's what the Gemara says now. Generally, Shmuel hold Kosova Shmuel halacha kerebi mechavei roi, that only when Rabbi argues with a single colleague, chaver of his, then the halacha is like Rabbi. V'loi mechavei rov, but when he argues with a number of chaverim, a number of chachomim, the halacha is not like Rabbi, the minority, rather like the majority. Ubaha, but in this case, Shmuel knew, afilu mechavei rov, the halacha is like the Rabbi, even though there's a majority against him, and these breads are osir. The sovar, and he said to himself, he assumed, asnayo ipcha, I'm going to teach the brisa opposite way round, in order that everybody should know that the halacha is that it's osur, and that's what is in truth, that's the halacha. Continues the Gemara. And now we're going back to a detail in that first brisa. We've learnt about the ovens themselves. If it's a new oven, it has to be smashed. If you say Zeva Zegorim Osir, an old oven doesn't have to be smashed. The bread is osir. If you say that there's shvach eitzim bepas, the bread is mutter. If you don't say shvach eitzim bepas, and then the brisa continued, bishlo al gabi gecholim, if you cooked on top of coals of isurei hana, divrei hakel mutter, everybody agrees that what you cooked with is, what you cooked not with, what you cooked with these coals is mutter. Says the Gemara, bishlo al gabi gecholim, divrei hakel hapas muteres, the bread that you cooked or you baked on the coals of Isurei Hana are mutter. Now we know that coals, there are two different stages of coals. You have coals that are oimemois, they're soldering, but they are pretty much extinguished. And then you have coals which are loichashes, that they are, so to speak, whispering with each other. There's movement there. You can still see the flames somewhat, or not. You don't see big flames. Coals don't generally have flame, but you can see that they are still active and there's movement in the coals. The question is, what stage of coals do we say that the Isurei Hana have already been disposed of, and from this point and on, it's not considered having Hana from the Isurei Hana? So it's actually a machlokes. Omar of Yehuda Omar Shmuel. There was a machlokes. Chad Omar, one of those opinions, either Shmuel or Rabbi Yochanan held, Loishanu, when did we say that if you cook bread on coals of Isurei Hana that it's mutter? Elo gecholim oimemois, only those types of coals that are already just smouldering, they're not anymore flickering. But if the coals are still flickering and there's movement in them, asurin, then it's as if there's still some substance to the original Isurei Hana, and the breads would be osa. V'chad Omar, the other opinion holds, afilu gecholim loichashes nami mutorin. Even if the coals are flickering, then it's considered that the Isurei Hana no longer are present, and it's mutter to have Hana from the bread. Now at this point, the Gemara assumes that coals, whenever you cook on anything, it's called coals. You're burning some substance, whatever it may be, and that burning substance is called a coal. And the Gemara assumes there are only ever two different stages. It's either a flickering coal or it's a smouldering coal, an extinguished one. There's nothing else. So the Gemara is asking, if you say that these whispering coals, if you cook on them when they are from Isurei Hana, then the bread is osir, mishum diyeshvach eitzim bepas, then I can understand that you've got a case where the bread is osir because you have benefit of the Isurei Hana in the breads. But according to the opinion that says not only are smouldering coals, if you bake on them, the bread is mutter, but even the whispering coals, the breads are mutter, in which case, pas to osar, the yeshvach eitzim bepas, le Rabbi, heichem mishkachasle. When do you ever have a case that Rabbi says that the breads are osar? Whenever you're baking breads, you're taking these these peels of orla or the straw of klei kerem, you're burning it, and when you burn it, it's a coal. And you're saying, even when the coal is flickering, it's mutter to have anah from the bread, so in what case is it osar? Omar of Papa says, yeah. You're right that if you're only ever heating up from the heat of these coals, it's always going to be mutter. When Rabbi says it's osir, it's not when you have coals on the side of the oven and the heat is reaching the breads, then it would be mutter. It's also when the flame when you're actually heating up these coals, then the direct contact between the flame and the bread, then that's when the bread, we say that yesh shvach eitzim bepas, that you've actually got the essence of the Isurei Hana is benefiting and is in the bread, and the bread is Asur b'Hana. Says the Gemara, so you can deduce from here that if Rabbi, who says that the bread is Asur, is only when the flames are actually directly heating up the bread, and in that case the Chachomim say in the Mishnah, they argue, they say that where Rabbi says the pas is Asur, where Rabbi holds yesh shvach eitzim bepas, the Chachamim say it's mutter. Michlal, you can deduce from here. The Rabbanon de Paligaleo, when the Rabbanon, the Chachamim who argue with Rabbi, Sharu, they say the bread is mutter, afiluk shavuka kenegdoi, even when the flame is directly opposite, is directly with the bread. Elo eitzim de asura l'Rabbanon hecha mishkachas lehu. We know that you're not allowed to have benefit from the woods of Isurei Hana. So according to Rabbi, we know you're not allowed to have benefit by burning these woods, and the flame is directly contributing and benefiting to the bread. But according to the Rabbanon, where even that is mutter, when do you ever have a scenario of Isurei Hana that you're not allowed to have benefit from the wood? Because even if you just light the wood and the flame is directly going onto the food item, or heating up, or benefiting, whatever it's benefiting, the Chachomim say that it's not, we don't say shvach eitzim bepas, and it's mutter, because since you're benefiting from heat, which is consequent to burning, and the burning is already post Isurei Hana, it's already, the Isurei Hana has been disposed of. When do you ever have bread, when do you ever have woods, logs of wood from Isurei Hana that are asa? Says the Gemara, you're right. You never have woods of Isurei Hana that are also to be used whilst burning. But however, how about if you use the woods without burning them? If you make a bench out of them and you're sitting on these woods, the woods are there, they're not being disposed of, they're there in their full proper state, and they're Isurei Hana, and you're sitting on them. You're not allowed to use them, not as a chair or as a footstool. That's having Hana from the whole state of the Isurei Hana, and that's also according to everybody. Continues the Gemara, Boy Minei Romi Bar Choma Merav Chizda. Rami Bar Choma asked Rav Chizda the following question: Tanur sheisuku ba'atzei hektish. We know that you're not allowed to have hana from hektish. What happens if you heated up an oven with the woods that are hektish? Va'afa boyapas, and you baked some bread in this oven that was heated up with Isurei Hana, with hektish. What's the halacha? So l'Rabbanon desharu b'kamaisa. According to Rabbi, that says that the shvach eitzim bepas, of course it's going to have the status of hektish, it's going to be aser. The Chachomim, who we learnt in that first brisa, not according to Shmuel's version where it was switched over. In the original brisa, where the Chachomim said that the bread that was heated up by Isurei Hana, Orla and Klei Kerem, the bread is mutter, what would they say regarding hektish? Omer lei. So Rav Chizda answered back to Rami Bar Choma, hapas asura. The bread is also, even the Chachomim who say that Orla and Klei Kerem, if you heat up with Orla and Klei Kerem, the bread is mutter. In the case of hektish, it will be also. Asks the Gemara, Uma bein zu le'orla. Why should there be a difference between heating up with hektish and heating up with orla? If you say that there's no shvach eitzim bepas, even with hektish, the bread should be mutter. So Rava says as follows. Rava says, you're asking me, we'll soon see, Rava has an issue with the halacha that says the bread is osir. But before we get there, Rava's responding, you're asking why there should be a difference between orla and hektish. Rava says that I can answer you. Omer Rava, hoche hashta. Orla b'teile b'mosayim. We find a leniency by orla we don't find with hektish. With orla, if it's a bottle, if you have one measure of orla and 200 measures of not orla, the orla is not osir, it's bottle. Hektish afilu be'elef loy bottle. Hektish, however, never becomes bottle. So you see that there's a stringency in other halachas of hektish over orla. So this is just another one that in the case of orla, the Chachomim say that we don't say yeshvach eitzim bepas, and by hektish we do. Ela Omar Rava ikashi leho kasha. Rava says this is what you should have had a challenge with, not where do we find a difference between Orla and Hekdesh, because of course we find a difference between Orla and Hekdesh, but you should have had an issue with it. How can you say the Hekdesh is Asur v'haloi moal? If you have derived benefit from Hekdesh, you've transgressed the Issa of Me'ilah. Me'ilah means that you are betraying the sanctity of Hekdesh, and you have to bring a korban, you have to pay for it, and there's an extra fine, you have to pay 25% extra. There's many halachas discussed in Maseches Me'ilah. That if you're going to heat up an oven with Hekdesh, you're having benefit from Hekdesh, you are Mo'al Hamasik, the one that heated up the oven, transgressed Me'ilah. We have a rule that wherever you transgress Me'ilah, wherever you have benefit from Hekdesh, to the point that you're going to have to bring a korban Me'ilah with the other consequences of Me'ilah, the Mo'al Hamasik, whenever the person who is using the Hekdesh to heat up an oven, nafku lahu l'chulin. We know there's a rule that the Hekdesh becomes chulin. It loses its status of Hekdesh, so to speak. It's become redeemed. It's not actually been redeemed, but so to speak, the Hekdesh becomes chulin, and you have to pay for the Hekdesh plus the 25%, and you have to bring a korban Me'ilah. But it goes out to chulin. So if having benefit from Hekdesh is Me'ilah, and anywhere where there's Me'ilah, the Hekdesh becomes chulin, then the bread was actually heated up with chulin fire, because the woods of Hekdesh became chulin. Why should the breads be osa? Omer of Papa is going to answer this. Because at the beginning we were just talking about, when Rami Bar Chama asked Rav Chisda his question, it just spoke about Atze Hekdesh, woods of Hekdesh. There are different levels of Hekdesh. There's Kochi Kochim, there's Kochim Kalim, there's different levels of Hekdesh with different ramifications of them if you use them, when there's Me'ilah, when there's no Me'ilah. So Rav Papa is saying we're talking about that the woods are shlomim, which means that these woods were dedicated to Hekdesh, that they would be sold and the money would be used for kochim kalim, namely a korban shlomim, or skinon, ve'alibad Rabbi Yehuda. And this is going according to Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda is going to tell us a new concept. Rabbi Yehuda says that whenever you use Hekdesh, and you're not allowed to use Hekdesh, but whenever you use Hekdesh to the point that you're not going to be chayav a korban me'ilah, then in that case, even though it was also to use it, the Hekdesh is not going to become chulin. Where do we find such a concept that you used Hekdesh and you're not chayav me'ilah, and therefore it doesn't become chulin? We see that from Rabbi Yehuda. Alibad Rabbi Yehuda da Omar. Rabbi Yehuda holds Hekdesh b'shoygeg mischalil b'meizid eine mischalil. In all Me'ilah, Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you transgressed Me'ilah intentionally, then there's no korban Me'ilah, and the Hekdesh does not go out to chulin. Only if you did it by mistake, then there's a chiyuv of Me'ilah, and the Hekdesh went out to chulin. B'meizid mai ta'am eloi. Why by Mezid does Rabbi Yehuda say that if you used Hekdesh intentionally, that it does not become chulin? The lav bar me'ilahu, because there's no korban me'ilah if you intentionally had anor from Hekdesh. Lo nofik l'chulin, therefore it does not become chulin. So since we see such a concept, that when you use Hekdesh, in the event that you don't bring a korban me'ilah, it does not go to chulin, the same is here. Shlomim nami, in the case of kochim, which is kochim kalim, in the case of kochim kalim, nami kiven de lav bar me'ilah ninhu. If you have anor from it, you do not bring a korban me'ilah, and therefore lo nafki l'chulin, and therefore they do not become chulin. So if you take woods that have the similar status of kochim kalim because they were dedicated in order to be sold, in order to buy kochim kalim, then the woods have a status of kochim kalim, and they are Hekdesh. And if you heat up bread with them, then the breads are heated up with Hekdesh. You're not allowed to have any anor from these breads. But the woods did not become chulin because it's kochim kalim. Asks the Gemara, is it true, this rule that we've discussed, that wherever there is me'ilah, and the person who heated up the oven transgressed me'ilah, indeed the woods that were used, they become chulin? V'tane, we learned in a brisa, kol hanisrofin, any isuri hano that you have to burn them, that get burnt, afron mutter. After they've become burnt, you're actually allowed to have benefit and pleasure from the ashes. Chutz me'atze ashera, besides for Atzei Asherah, in most cases, that woods of Asherah, that even after they've been burnt, that you're not allowed to have any benefit from the ashes, providing it was burnt by a Yisrael. Va'efer hekdesh, and the ashes of hekdesh, la'olam, in all cases, that once they've got burnt, even after it's got burnt, it's asur, that you're not even allowed to have any benefit from the ashes. So how can you say that you're not allowed to have benefit if when you burnt it, you are transgressed me'ilah? And if you transgressed me'ilah, then it becomes chulin. If it becomes chulin, it's not asar ba'ana. How do we understand this brisa that efer hekdesh la'olam, in all cases the ashes of hekdesh remain asar even after they've been turned into ashes? Answers the Gemara, Omer Rami bar Chama, kegoyin shenoflo dleika me'ileha ba'atze hekdesh. If you have woods of hekdesh, proper hekdesh, not hekdesh of kochim kalim, proper hekdesh, and they got burnt, but not by somebody. If somebody burnt them, then that somebody is going to be chayiv me'ilah, and since he'll be chayiv me'ilah, the woods become chulin. What happens if they burnt on their own? If they burnt on their own, and there's nobody that's actually going to be chayiv me'ilah, they retain their hekdesh state, and therefore the ashes stay osa. The leke inish, the nimel, there was no person who actually did the me'ilah. Rabbi Shemaiah gives another explanation. Of course you're right that if you did me'ilah, if you took woods of hekdesh and you burnt them, the ashes will be mutter because they became chulin. However, there are certain ashes that became ashes not because somebody transgressed me'ilah, but because that's what was supposed to happen. For example, there's a case where you've got, for example, Trumas Hadeshen, which is the woods that were on the Mizbeach, and the woods got burnt, they burnt up the korbanos, and they are now ashes. Then one shovel load of these ashes, called Trumas Hadeshen, they have to be taken off the Mizbeach, placed next to the Mizbeach. This was an avodah done every morning in the Beis HaMikdash, and as we already learned previously on Daf Chavov, that these ashes, even though they've already been burnt and you've done everything that's supposed to be done with them has been done, nonetheless we learn out from a pasuk that they remain asar. So those ashes, even though they're already ashes, the efer hekdesh la'olam, they always retain the hekdesh state and they're asar ba'ana. The Tanya, as we saw in the Brisa regarding the Trumas Hadeshen, v'samu, it says in the pasuk that you have to be v'samoi eitzel HaMizbeach. For we learn out from V'samoi, Benachas, put it down gently. V'samoi kuloi, you have to put it down, the whole pile has to be put there. V'samoi shloi fazer, you have to make sure it doesn't get spread out. And we saw in Daf Chavov, there's even a loshon there that you're not allowed to derive any benefit from it. That means it has to be there and make sure it stays there, and nobody should take or use those ashes at all. Regarding those ashes of the Trumas Hadeshen, those ashes indeed, they do not become chulin, and that's what the Brisa says, that they are afron, the ve'efer hekdesh la'olam asur. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda oimer ein biur v'chulu. This takes us back to our Mishnah on Daf Chaf Aleph on Mud Aleph at the beginning of the Perek, where the last discussion in the Mishnah is how does one have to dispose of chometz on Erev Pesach. Rabbi Yehuda oimer ein biur chometz elo sreifa. Rabbi Yehuda says that the only way to dispose of chometz is by burning, and we already saw in Daf Yud Beis that that's primarily before the Zman of Issa, which means before the end of the 6th hour, but after the end of the 6th hour, from after Chatzos, then Rabbi Yehuda says, like the Chachomim oimrim, af mefarer v'zoyer l'ruach, you don't have to burn it, you can crumble up the chometz and scatter it in the wind, oy matileyam, or you can throw it into the sea. Any way of disposing of it is acceptable, and you've done the mitzvah of tashbisu. And you've avoided transgressing bal yiroeh and bal yimotze, etc. Says the Gemara. So now we're going to want to find a source. Where do you see in the Torah that the way that you have to dispose of chometz is by burning? All it says is tashbisu, dispose of the chometz. The Torah actually doesn't tell us how. So there must be some source. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Omer Rabbi Yehuda, ein biur chometz elo sreifa. He says Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, biur chometz is only b'sreifa. V'adin noisen, he learns it from a kal v'chomer. Uma noisar. What's the halacha of noisar? We know that korbanos are only allowed to be eaten for a fixed amount of time. Once that time is over, you're not allowed to eat it. Eating noisar is severely asur. It's actually a chiyuv of koros. So man noisar she'einoi bebali roe ubali motze. We don't find regarding noisar that there's a severe issa to see it, to own it, to have it. No, you have noisar. Make sure you burn it. You're not allowed to eat it. But noisar is definitely more lenient than chometz, in as much as that chometz has all these stringencies of bali roe and bali motze, and nonetheless ton sreifa. The pasuk says that if you have noisar, you have to burn it. Chometz, which is even more stringent than noisar, sheyeshnei bebali roe ubali motze, it has all these added stringencies of bali roe and bali motze. Lo kolshkein sheton sreifa. Of course, you should have to dispose of it by burning. Omruloi, the Chachomim responded to Rabbi Yehuda and said, you're bringing a source from a kal v'chomer that you have to burn the chometz and only burn the chometz. Kol din she'atadon tchilosei lehachmir. You're using this kal v'chomer to be stringent and say, don't just dispose of it any which way, dispose of it only with burning. It's a stringency. So you're making a kal v'chomer in order to be machmir, to be stringent. But v'soifei lehokil. Ultimately, that's going to bring a leniency, bring lax or lenient in the halacha of disposing of chometz, and einoi din. Any kal v'chomer, the whole concept of a kal v'chomer is that you say that the more stringent halacha under discussion should remain more stringent. If it's more stringent than noisar, then make sure that it's always at least as stringent as noisar, you have to burn it. But if it's actually going to cause you to make this issue of chometz more kal, a kula, a leniency, you have no kal v'chomer. In what case is the stringency of needing to burn chometz going to be a leniency, going to cause some leniency or laxity in this halacha? What's going to be if he doesn't have wood? He doesn't find wood to burn the chometz. He's going to say that the mitzvah of tashbis is only with burning. I don't have wood to burn with, I just won't burn it. And the Torah says that you have to get rid of chometz from your homes. With anything, that any way of disposing it, make sure you dispose of the chometz. And over here, if you say that you have to burn it only with wood, is going to be a point where a person is not going to destroy the chometz. And Rashi actually explains here, and there's a bit of a complication how to read this, but Rashi, it seems from Rashi to say that Rabbi Yehuda agrees, and everybody agrees, that tashbisu means you can destroy it any which way. And after the 6th hour, we saw in Daf Yud Beis, Rabbi Yehuda agrees you destroy it any which way. What's going to be with a person that leaves his home within 30 days before Pesach, and it's already incumbent on him to do tashbisu, to make sure that when Pesach comes, he doesn't have any chometz. And before the end of the 6th hour, that's when Rabbi Yehuda says that tashbisu means only with wood, only with burning. You have to burn it. Ein bir chometz elo b'sreifa. So if so, somebody is going to leave his home a few days before Pesach, and he's going to say, Rabbi Yehuda's got a kal v'chomer, I need to burn it with, I need to dispose of it by burning. I don't have wood, I'm not disposing of it. What's going to happen then? Erev Pesach is going to arrive, the end of the 6th hour is going to arise. At this point, tashbis will get rid of it any which way, but he's not home, he can't get rid of it anymore. And this person will end up having chometz in his home over Pesach. That's a leniency. And since needing to burn chometz with this halacha that you have to dispose of the chometz by burning before the 6th hour, any time from 30 days before Pesach till the end of the 6th hour, you have to do it by burning, is going to make a leniency, if you didn't have wood before then, that once the 6th hour is over, you're going to be left with chometz. And since it's going to cause a leniency, therefore we cannot learn from such a kal v'chomer, and Rabbi Yehuda himself has to agree that this kal v'chomer cannot be a source. A kal v'chomer from noisar cannot be a source that ein biur chometz elo b'sreifa. So says the Gemara, Choza Rabbi Yehuda v'donu din acher. Rabbi Yehuda says, you're right. I can't learn it out from a kal v'chomer. I can learn it out from Gzeirus HaKosuv. Rashi calls this Gzeirus HaKosuv a Gzeirus Shava, Tosfos calls it a Memotzinu, but either way, when we find similarities between halachas, we assume that the similarity determines a similarity across the board with all the halachas. So we learn from one to another. That we're actually learning from Noisar, not from a Kal V'chomer. Not because Chometz is more Chomer than Noisar because you have Bal Yirah. No, just from the similarity to Noisar. Noisar Asur B'achila, V'chometz Asur B'achila. They both have something in common, that they're Asur B'achila. You're not allowed to eat Noisar, you're not allowed to eat Chometz on Pesach. Ma Noisar B'sreifa, Af Chometz B'sreifa. So we say that if there's a similarity, and Noisar, the Torah says explicitly you have to burn, so too Chometz you have to burn. Omruloi, the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yehuda that this similarity is not enough of a reason to require you to burn, because I can find you a similarity, I can find you other things that you're not allowed to eat, that you don't have to burn them. The fact that you're not allowed to eat something doesn't mean you have to burn it. Nevela toichiach, if you had a corpse of an animal, a nevela, shasura ba'achila, you're not allowed to eat it, ve'ina tu'una sreifa, you don't have to burn it. It's even mutar b'hano, we've seen in the Gemara before. So if so, the fact that there's a similarity between Chometz and Noisar, that it's also B'achila, is not sufficient and reason to say that you have to burn it. Omar Lehen, so Rabbi Yehuda said, Hefresh, you can still differentiate, there's a difference between the Nevela and Noisar. That Noisar is also B'achila u'B'hana. That unlike Nevela, which is Mutar B'hana, Noisar is Asar B'hana, and Chometz is Asar B'hana. So the similarity between Chometz and Noisar is broader than just Issa B'achila. It's also Asar B'hana. So that comparison, Noisar is Asar B'achila u'B'hana, v'Chometz Asar B'achila u'B'hana, and then we say that Ma Noisar Ton Sreifa, just like Noisar, the Torah says you have to burn it, Af Chometz Ton Sreifa, so too Chometz needs to be burnt. Omruloi. So the Chachamim said that's also not enough reason. I'll find you another case where something is Asar B'achila and Asar B'hana, and we don't find that you have to burn it. Sheir Haniskel Yechiach. This ox that killed somebody, and this ox has to be stoned. She'Asar B'achila u'B'hana, you're not allowed to eat it, nor have hana from it. Ve'enei ton sreifa, it does not need to be burnt. So you see that just because Chometz is similar to Noisar, that it's not allowed to have achila or ana, is not enough reason to say that you have to burn it, because it's as similar to Sheir Haniskel, and you don't have to burn it. Omar Len, Rabbi Yehuda responded, Hefresh, there's another difference. Noisar, also ba'achila, u'b'hana, ve'enish korus. That Noisar has, not only is it also b'achila, not only is it also b'hana, it's also punishable by korus if you eat chometz, if you eat Noisar. V'chometz, and chometz is similar to Noisar in those three, that it's also b'achila, u'b'hana, ve'enish korus. And that's something that Sheir Haniskel doesn't have that. Sheir Haniskel is not chayev korus if you eat or have hana from it. Ma Noisar b'sreifa, av chometz b'sreifa. Omruloi, the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yehuda, no, the fact that it's Asar B'achila, Asar B'hana, and Koros is not enough reason to say that you have to burn it, because there's something else which is just as similar, and you don't have to burn it. Chelboi, the chaylev, eating chaylev, is chayiv skila. Is chayiv Koros. And shel Sheir Haniskel, chaylev of Sheir Haniskel, normally chaylev is not Asar B'hana, but if it's chaylev of Sheir Haniskel, it is Asar B'hana. So you've got chaylev of Sheir Haniskel, Sheyochiach will prove she'Asar B'achila, u'b'hana, ve'enish korus, ve'en ton sreifa. Do you see from that, and there's no requirement to burn it, so then the question comes back, how can you learn chometz from Noisar, because it has these three? The chaylev of Sheir Haniskel also has these three and doesn't need sreifa. Chozar Rabbi Yehuda v'donu din achi. Rabbi Yehuda adds another detail and says that Noisar has an added prat, and that is yeshnei bebal toisiru. That there's a chiyuv of Noisar, there's a special mitzvah or chiyuv to make sure that you don't have a situation of Noisar. Do everything you can that there shouldn't be Noisar. The chometz, and chometz also, the Torah says, b'bal toisiru, make sure that you don't have any chometz left over. There's an isov bali roy, an isov bali motzeh. And you don't have that by Sheir Haniskel or by Nevela, that you make sure it doesn't happen. And this similarity, ma Noisar b'sreifa, av chometz b'sreifa. In the same way as Noisar has this attribute of bal toisir, and you have to burn it, chometz also. Omruloi, the Chachomim responded to Rabbi Yehuda and said, we're going to bring proof from you yourself, Rabbi Yehuda, in the content of Noisar, that there are cases in Noisar where you do not need to burn it. It's true that a regular Noisar, you have to burn it. But we've got cases of Noisar that you, Rabbi Yehuda, hold, you do not need to burn it. And even though in all other areas it's similar to Chometz, it's also b'achila and it's also b'hana, and there's a chiyuv koros. And you, Rabbi Yehuda, say that you do not need to burn it. When does Rabbi Yehuda say there's a case of Noisar that you do not need to burn? Osham toli, if you have a korban osham toli, which is any time where a person does an aveira, that if he did it intentionally is chayav koros, and he did it by mistake is chayav chatos. If he has a doubt if he did it, for example, he had a piece of meat in front of him, and you don't know if it's chaylev, which is punishable by koros, or if it's a regular meat, and he ate one of them, it's a suffix. He has to bring an osham toli. Or chatos sa'oif. What happens if a woman who after birth, she has to bring a korban chatos from a bird? But if it's haboal asofik, if she has a doubt whether she actually gave birth to a human fetus or whether whatever she miscarried was not considered a birth, and she doesn't know if she has to bring a korban of Leda chatas oif, then we learn out that she has to bring, she's not allowed to eat hektish till she brings the korban, and she's allowed to bring a korban misofik, a sofik chatas oif. So l'dvarecha, according to you, Rabbi Yehuda, that you say in these two cases, Yochichu is going to prove against you, shehein bebaltei siru, because they have osa b'achila and it's osa b'hana and it's koros if you eat them, and there's an issa to make them noisar. She'anu oimrim, we say, we hold b'sreifa. We Chachomim hold that in these cases also you burn them. But you, Rabbi Yehuda oimer b'kvura, you say that you have to bury them, or you're allowed to bury them. You don't have to burn them. So according to you, Rabbi Yehuda, how can you say that chometz has to be burnt because of noisar? Here we have a case where something is similar to chometz, like noisar, and you don't need to burn them. Shosak Rabbi Yehuda didn't respond. He was silent. And it seems that they managed to refute Rabbi Yehuda. Omer Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef commented on this. Hainu d'omri inchi. Here we have a similarity to what people say the following. There's three quotes we're going to see now. And the common denominator between them is where somebody is actually getting affected negatively by something he himself did. So, like over here, Rabbi Yehuda says Ein biur chometz elos reifa, and he proved it from Noisar, and it was something else Rabbi Yehuda himself said that disproved that. So what are these three? So Rav Yosef says Hainu da'amri inchi. People would say kappa, a dish or a spoon, dechota nagra, that was hollowed out by a craftsman, begava nisreif chardela. With that very spoon that this very craftsman crafted out, hollowed out, he's actually going to burn his tongue when he eats mustard with it. Omar Abai says it could get even worse. In the case of mustard, it's not that terrible. It's true that it was this craftsman that hollowed out the spoon, but mustard is something that can be eaten. It does affect a person, it does burn him, but it is edible. However, Abai says it's even worse. Abai says it's compared to, or sometimes a contradiction between what a person said and something else he said could be as bad as sadna, a shackle maker, besidni Yosef, where he's going to actually be jailed and he's going to be held together, contained with the shackles that he himself made. Midavil Yodei, from the very handiwork, his own work, mishtalim, he's going to be paid, it's going to go against him. And over there it's much worse than the mustard. The mustard is edible, it just burns a little bit. In the case of the shackles, he's actually being punished. It's something which there's nothing positive with it. However, it is reversible. It is possible somehow to open up the shackles. However, Rava says it's even worse. There are some cases where a contradiction that we find against, or a refutation against what somebody is saying, is as serious as gira, as somebody who makes arrows, an arrow maker, begirei maktil, who's actually killed with the arrows that he himself made, and that's totally irreversible. Midvil yodeh, from his own handiwork, mishtalim, it's going to pay him back and come against him. That's how the Ben Ish Chai explains, and Ben Yehoyada explains these three. There's three different levels how a person can be negatively affected by something he himself did or said. And in Yitzchok in the next shiur, we're going to continue from here.